Please don't spend $500 or something crazy like even $2,000 on speaker cables. Well, not unless I guess you want to. Nothing wrong with that, as long as it's in proportion to the rest of your system. But if a large portion of your budget is going to speaker cables instead of things that'll actually have a noticeable difference, like speakers, you're kind of doing this backwards. On the other hand, say you have everything just how you want it as far as the rest of your gear. Sure, go ahead, splurge on a cable or two. At the very least, you know that high quality cable is there, and it likely does look nice, and that might be enough for you. I'm not doing this today expecting any type of clear moment where suddenly the veil is lifted from my speakers. I'm simply doing this because I like the way they look, and I know at the very least they'll give me everything that I could get from, well, a speaker cable. And I didn't pay some company crazy amounts of money for something I can do myself. Like I said, I'm not anti-cable, but I am anti-snake salesman who might be trying to influence you into thinking that a $2,000 speaker cable is the move to make instead of putting it somewhere much more beneficial. To me, this is the answer. As good or better cables, and you're doing it for a fraction of the cost. If this is completely out of the realm of where you're comfortable, reach out to me in my email in my description, and I don't know, maybe I'd be willing to build some of these for people who aren't comfortable doing it. I can't do it for free, as it does take some time, but we can look into that if it comes to it. Today I'm going to show you 3 different speaker cable builds, from really cheap to what many might consider semi-expensive. The key being that even the most expensive option is much cheaper than some of the crazy prices we see on audiophile speaker cables today. Last thing before we start building, are we going to cover how these cables sound after I have them complete? No. If I'm going to do that, we might as well be reviewing the Romex in my walls or the random budget cables inside of our amps or preamps. It should be clear that speaker cables only need to follow a few rules, really. Less cable is generally better. Just try to make sure the length matches your needs. It doesn't have to be exact, but let's avoid running a 50-foot cable to a speaker 4 feet away. Generally speaking, bigger the better, especially as you increase the distance. The larger the gauge of cable, the less resistance we encounter. You should also keep your cables the same length, technically. Will you hear a difference if it's in the same realm? No, not really a chance, but as we are audiophiles, we like to nitpick things, so just keep these things in mind, but at the same time, don't break out a microscope to dial in your cables. Now let's get into the builds. First up is going to be our cheapest option, and that's this new Concepts cord. It's 12 gauge, it's super flexible, oxygen-free copper. I really like working with it, and it's only $22 for 50 feet. We're going to pair these with the $17 Media Bridge gold-plated banana plugs. These work with 8 to 18 gauge, have self-crimping teeth for a really quick install. To use these, simply strip the wire, leave around a 1/2 inch exposed, trim it up if needed, then fan all the copper around the connection until it's sort of an umbrella. Screw on the top and the teeth will bite down on all the cable, creating a very secure connection that really won't slip out unless you left it too loose. You could realistically pull a car with these, at least that's what it feels like. These really work well and fit in with budget option number 1. Moving up the ladder, we have the roughly $2 a foot Conair 4S11G Star Quad cable with a 3/8 inch Flexo Remix expandable sleeve. When you're working with these, I would first of all suggest use a very sharp razor. You want it to the point where you barely need to put any pressure on this at all to get that cut, to get the protective sleeve off. The last thing you want to do is cut into the wires, so just make sure to be really careful there. And then you'll notice that there are 4 wires coming out of this, as well as a string. Just cut the string and then sort your wires out. You do want to keep these within a pattern, as they do use the Star Quad pattern. This is 4 14 gauge wires, so what you're going to end up with is a pair of 11 gauge cables here. From here we can strip the ends and twist these into pairs. I mentioned the Star Quad pattern, and that is the entirety of the cable is arranged in a manner that minimizes interference. It's not something that is going to provide a eureka moment or anything like that, but it does provide measurable resistance to electromagnetic interference. That being said, if your cable isn't running through any areas heavy with electromagnetic interference, it's unlikely you're going to notice anything here. Next, we're going to jazz these up a bit with some clear shrink tubing on the twisted ends. Really, the only purpose here is looks. I prefer this look over the cable pants, and that's half of what we're doing here. Just making cables you like, and you can get these in every color you could imagine. Definitely a little more involved than option 1, but nothing too difficult as long as you have really just a few tools. Like I mentioned, I didn't go with the boots look here, so I'm just using a couple different shrink tubes in place of it here. Really serves the same purpose, keeps the wires together where they split. These are the Viborg VB401G. This package includes 4 banana plugs, so you'll need to pick up a couple of these at around $35 each. These are definitely more of a premium banana plug in comparison to the ones we used in option 1, but I really like these. Probably my favorite to build with. They can handle up to a 4-gauge wire and have a spring mechanism that really gives a nice contact and fit within the binding posts. You'll just want to get the full length of the bare cable in and tighten them down pretty snug. You don't need to wrench on these extremely hard, just, what you'd consider normal tight. These come with branded shrink tubes that look pretty nice, so I just trimmed these up to size and installed them for channel identification. And that's that. Really, well, I consider really nice cables, customized to the look I was going for on that day. You'll see I finished the ends on this one of different lengths, and that's to leave options on particular gear that has the terminals further spaced apart. Option 3, our most expensive and largest cable. Once again, we're trimming off the electroduct 1/2-inch expandable sleeve here, and then getting into the cutting the actual cable jacket. One useful tip I can give here beyond saying just be really gentle is pinch the cable like I'm doing here as I cut. The jacket will cut this way with the slightest bit of pressure, making sure you leave the inner wires intact. The cable used for this build is the Mogami W3104. It's another 4-conductor quad-core cable, 12 gauge per conductor. This thing is really massive, but has extremely good flexibility for its size. I think we end up with something like 9 or 10 gauge cable once we bring these together. Once again, it's a matter of getting things ready to be stripped and twisted. The trick I'm showing here though is that it can be difficult to strip some of these with the large wires without damaging the actual copper. But if you heat them up a little bit, they'll actually slide off like butter, and it's really the way I would go on this. Same story as before, follow the star quad pattern, which in this case is red and yellow and brown and orange. If you're going to spend this much on a cable, you might as well follow their intentional design here. I'm going to be twisting these ones pretty hard too, as the binding posts I'm using are pretty large, so I really want to have something good for them to bite into. Next, simply cutting my version of a splitter with some black shrink tube, as well as the clear shrink tubes I like to put on the twisted ends. I bought so many different colors of shrink tube that I decided to expand the splitter on these and add a little bit of color. Not really necessary, but it does stiffen up the cable where they split, which is alright too. Since these are not the typical red and black connectors under the clear shrink, being brown and orange and red and yellow, I'm adding the included red and white ones that came with the Viborg banana plugs. These are the Viborg VB402R rhodium plated bananas. These things can basically handle any gauge you throw at them. I believe down to 0 actually. Very well made banana plugs, and also the most premium that we're going to build with today. Like I mentioned, the W3104 is 4 12 gauge connectors, bringing this configuration to a 9 gauge cable. Safe to say, it's gonna fit. Wrapping this up, you can see it's really not all that hard to build your own premium cables. It takes a few tools, time, and some patience certainly, but it's kind of fun to customize how you like them, look and length. And sure, they don't have magic dust within the sleeves or crazy promises, but I can promise you all three of these work just fine.